is my place, and I am welcome.
And good morning, wherever you are listening to this, either live or recorded. Thanks for this opportunity to allow me into your space. It's a gift that Unity York Region gives me to be able to be here, because my path seems to be about speaking the things I need to learn. So, but however, this one is actually one of my strengths, and I'll say more about that as we go. So, as you heard from Vesna, the topic today is, how do you feel your zeal? And I once was told that I either am on full stop or full go. I don't seem to have any spaces in between, and zeal and passion are definitely some that I appreciate deeply in my life. So let's explore this term called zeal a little bit. Well, the first thing that came to mind as I started to prepare this was, that's a pretty strange word. I'm going to ask you a question. How many times have you used that word in conversation in the last week, the last month, the last year? It's just not a word we hear very often. So why do we use that as one of the 12 powers of unity, one of the 12 powers of humanity to remember our divinity? Well, it goes back to this man, Charles Fillmore, the guy who helped co-start Unity with his wife, Myrtle. Charles is the one who wrote a lot about zeal. And here are some of the things that he wrote, and I'm just going to change my screen a little bit more so I can see it better for myself. One of the things he wrote in 12 Powers of Man, it's the impulse of existence. Pretty deep and powerful impulse, obviously. Another thing he said, the inward fire of the soul that urges us onward. Again, a very deep place that he's writing. And this one, Wendy Carr described this on the service on Thanksgiving weekend. This quote, I fairly sizzle with zeal and enthusiasm to do the things that ought to be done by me. Again, that pretty powerful stuff, particularly for somebody who's 94. And in fact, it was shortly before he made his transition. But again, I asked the question, why this word zeal? Well, as I did more exploring, it turns out that zeal has a history in spiritual and religious terms. In fact, in the King James Bible, which was published in 1611 and was really used throughout sort of Christian liturgy and society until about 1950, the word zeal appears 26 times. Now let's compare that to some other words that we might use instead of zeal. The word passion, for example, survey says 3 times. That's how many times it appears in the King James Bible. How about the word enthusiasm? 0 times. It doesn't even appear in the Bible. Energy, again, this is the King James Bible version we're talking about. 0 times as well. So if Charles was writing and speaking in today's age, he might use words like passionate energy, or perhaps spiritual enthusiasm. I'll let you find your own words for what you connote and denote zeal to be. So how do we describe zeal today? Well, a technical definition, if I can describe it that way, in the Oxford Dictionary is this one: great energy or enthusiasm, specifically in pursuit of a cause or an objective. Great energy or enthusiasm. Howard Thurman, who's an American theologian, philosopher, civil rights leader, said this, and it's pointing towards zeal even though it doesn't use the word. Ask yourself what makes you come alive and go and do that. Another window on zeal. Here's another one by Mary Grace Sorensen, a reverend of a Unity speaker in Temple, Texas. She said this: your zeal already exists within you as an inner spark. Another way of seeing it. So let's imagine these 2 sparks. What would it look like if these sparks shone through beings, through us, through others. Perhaps it might look like something like this. And if you can see this picture, or you can't, this radiant energy from this young Mongolian girl, and even the camel sitting behind her. For me, that's the essence of zeal. It's the sheer delight of being, like a natural radiance within us. But perhaps you haven't felt that one in a while, or seen it in the people around you. And that's what we're here to explore today. How do we cultivate that natural sense of sheer delight of being? So whether zeal for you is that inner spark, or maybe the ability to come alive like this girl in the leaves, or whether the fire of the soul is something that speaks to you and perhaps it's been part of your life. For me, zeal is something we all have access to, some form of this energy. So here's my next question. How do you feel your zeal? Do you feel it as enthusiasm in the things that you get involved in? It could be anything from music to gardening to making a difference in the world. Do you experience it perhaps as passion? Is that the word that comes up inside, either the one that you feel or the one that you aspire to and long for, to have passion in your life? Maybe you feel your zeal in moments when you feel really alive, or in love with someone or something. Take a breath for a moment and just let zeal begin to creep into your being. Do you feel it as a glow inside, a kind of a radiance or a joy as your smile begins to grow? Do you feel it as pure joy, that place you go perhaps in nature or with someone you care about? And you can feel that radiating inside. Or does it come out in words or sounds like, ah, yes, or wow? Perhaps your zeal looks something like this, or maybe this is the zeal you long for, this radiance of the child on the swing. Do you remember being on a swing and just letting that zeal, that energy, that joy flow forth? You can even see it in the color of this artwork. Or maybe it looks something like this cat. I love this little picture. I keep coming back to it in different times over several years. Just this beaming smile of this little putty tat. I'm a cat guy, so you can probably tell that. I'd like you for a moment to just reflect. Think of some moments when you felt that aliveness. Just take a breath and see what pictures or what memories come to mind. And now what I'd like to do is throw you a curveball. I'm a baseball guy as well, and we're at the World Series time, and throwing curveballs is something the best pitchers do. Well, I want to throw you a curve with zeal. And here's what I mean by that. Here's another picture of a cat. But this one, if you can see, it looks a little different. It looks a little bit more devilish, if you will, with that grin and those teeth. Zeal takes other forms in our world, doesn't it? Perhaps you experience it as judgment. Now, I know nobody here judges anybody, but imagine yourself watching the news or watching politicians north or south of the border. Maybe you touch judgment at times. Maybe you see somebody else in your life and you are perpetually moved to the edge of frustration. Or do you ever try to change someone or something in your life and it just doesn't seem to move, and you could feel that judgment and frustration starting to come and ramp up? And maybe it goes further. Maybe it turns into anger and attack. Take a breath with those, because they are part of our human experience. Certainly have been of mine. And maybe it's literal hate. Maybe your cat inside, when it touches this aspect of zeal, looks more like this snarling cat on the screen in front of us. Try not to judge it, but just to observe your own experience with this aspect of zeal. The fact is, those two are zeal. That when we use our energy, our aliveness, and our passion strongly for or against something. And that's why the word zealous, coined by the Merriam-Webster dictionary, says fervent partisanship, partisan being for or against. And the word zealot, same root word, zealot is defined as a person who is fanatical and uncompromising. You can see how far in worldly terms we've come from Charles Fillmore's original vision of what zeal is. This is zeal guided by the human ego, by the aspect of our mind that knows fear and feels separate from love or God or all that is. Joel Beek, a writer on this particular website, described it this way. He said, to a certain degree, we are all zealots. The question is not whether we are zealous, but what we are zealous for. Zeal runs in our veins for what we love and against what we hate. That's how the human mind uses zeal. It also uses it in one more fashion that's been very deeply part of my life. We use our energy, our aliveness, and our passion to avoid things. Have you ever avoided something with a passion? We don't let ourselves feel, see, hear, go there, do it. We do our best to avoid it. And we may even go further. We may even use that energy to actively suppress that thing we think or see outside ourselves. We push it down. Be quiet are words we may have heard in the past. Don't go there. Think for a moment the words that you might have said to yourself over the years with something that you've tried to avoid or suppress. I can't. I just can't do that. I shouldn't. Others just won't accept it. They'll be upset. Some of the words we use to suppress our own zeal. It would be too much for them or for me to put out. What will people think of me if I say or do this? Again, this is zeal guided by our fearful mind or aspect of mind, not by the spirit of love that we talk about in unity and that Charles was pointing to with the word zeal. And in fact, this is exactly what I did to myself when I began my own spiritual journey with this text called A Course in Miracles. All of the religious, spiritual language in it was so repugnant to my upbringing, so threatening to my ego, that when I started to express it and other people said, we don't want to hear it, I totally repressed my spiritual expression and did so for 20 years. I could barely ever talk about spirit, let alone God or religion. So that's what happened to me, but maybe something like that has happened to you too. So how do we reconnect to that zeal that Charles Fillmore was pointing towards? Well, first thing is I'd invite you to start noticing your feelings of that aliveness or joy, the way that first cat looked or that child on the swing. And it's why the unity message this month is, I ignite my zeal by focusing on what brings me joy. Notice it in those places where joy is vibrant, but also notice it where it's barely present. Maybe it just feels like a gentle wind or whisper. Watch for those ones too. Take a breath. The next one I invite you to notice is what you avoid or suppress. What are the things you push away outside of yourself or push down inside of yourself? And I invite you to consider this. Don't let your inner zealot stomp your inner zeal. You see that foot just squelching what's important to me or you? Don't do that to yourself. Or when you do, notice it at least. And maybe even you might have a grin coming up as you see that foot stomping it, because you might remember that from the show Monty Python, and you'd be accurate in that. Don't let your inner zealot stomp your inner zeal. The third one I'd like you to notice in your life: your judgments, your anger, and even your hate. I invite you not to push them away, to suppress them, but be present to them. In fact, a woman by the name of Karen Shepherd, a reverend with Unity Good Shepherd Ministries in Ohio, said, why not try to commune with them, be present to them, as if you were holding some precious part of you in the palm of your hands? What if you could be that tender, caring with your own hate, your own anger, or judgments? How might it transform them if you could bring love to those hurt, fearful places inside of you? The fact is that love, joy, suppression, hate are all part of zeal as we experience it in our world. We can use our passion to create any of those. And it shapes our life experiences, and it will shape the experiences of people around us. So the question becomes, not are you going to feel it, but how are you going to use it? So I invite you to consider two questions. What do I want to experience in my life? And the second is, what kind of world do I want to create? Because how we use our zeal will shape both of those. I'd like to share a little story along that path of how I used my zeal and how it shaped me. This fall is the 40th anniversary of this program. Now, you might not recognize that blue crate in front of you, but it has transformed into these forms of blueness in the world. In other words, the blue box. I was part of helping to start that 40 years ago. And so I decided for the 40th anniversary to write the story of how the blue box began. And as I wrote about it, it was like, oh, this is truly in parallel with this month's topic of zeal. You see, back then, I was pretty passionate about garbage. Yeah, I know it sounds strange, but that happened to be my passion. I would go anywhere, anytime to talk about the 3 R's of garbage or waste: reduce, reuse, recycle, because I felt that it could help to transform our environment, our world, and my own life, and those of others. You might say I had a missionary zeal as I went out and did it. The problem was, I was also in deep conflict, because I was on the right side of you should, and for those who didn't do the 3 R's, they were on the other side, and I was pretty passionate about how wrong they might be or how they should change their lives. And I wasn't as effective in creating the change in my life and the world as I wanted to be. I thought what we as nonprofit recyclers were doing was right and best, and that what government and industry were doing wasn't. And we and I literally saw them as the opposition or the enemy. That's where I was coming from. Well, because of the conflict, I was calling in the need for help, and what appeared was this book called A Course in Miracles, My Spiritual Path. And the course helped start to shape some ways of thinking differently. In other words, how could I start to see people like government and industry differently? How could I treat people differently? How could I start to listen to them more deeply? How could I connect with them more richly, more personally, instead of holding a wall between us? Well, around that time, early 80s, 2 men from a garbage collection company appeared in my life. One was the president, Ron Murray. This was a garbage collection company called Superior Sanitation in Kitchener. And one was collection manager, Niall Ludolf. And both began to express a different way of seeing garbage. Ron said, I don't think we should just be making our money from collecting garbage. We should be able to do more for municipalities than just collect it. And Niall said, what if we started to try to recycle it? Well, I heard both of their hearts, and something in me flipped, and I decided to propose a test program in the city of Kitchener, how we could put their ideas into action to see if people on the large scale would recycle. Well, in order to work with a garbage collection company, having come from the nonprofit side of things, I needed to literally change my own thinking. I had to see them differently. For example, I had to think into the needs of their company. I needed to see them and others as partners instead of competitors or the opposition. I needed to start seeing and serving everyone's interests, whether it was local residents and ratepayers, a local alderman, the mayor who we needed to work with, local media, radio, TV, newspapers, nonprofit groups locally and provincially, as well as higher levels of government and industry. I needed, and my partners needed, to think into the interests of all of those if we were going to create a program that would not just change recycling there, but in other places. One of the questions that has come to me over the years is, how did you convince people to take part and recycle? And my simple answer is, we didn't. We didn't want to convince people to do what they didn't want to do. We wanted to try to inspire and empower them to do something that they did want to do. We tried to educate them through monthly newsletters, to tell them about recycling and the power of what recycling would do to, and you'll see this phrase, you can make a difference. This is a phrase that we hadn't really heard before at that time. This was 1981. And we wanted to help people to understand that if they took a material and started to recycle it, that they could change the amount of pollution, energy usage, tree usage, that their actions, small as they might be, really could transform the world around them and their own lives. And it touched something in people, so much so that within 3 weeks of starting the program, 50% of households had taken part in it, and over 12 tons of material had been collected in just those 3 weeks. It was a sign that we were speaking to their hearts, and people across the city began to want it, not just in our test area. And it kept growing. I have this little tilde on the screen, this little mark, to indicate that this is when I actually left the program. Spirit was calling me to go on and do more work. But as my partners and others continued with it, it grew across Kitchener, it grew to other cities in Ontario, it grew right across the province, such that the province made it the model for recycling, and then it grew to other cities in the world. And 8 years later, the United Nations Environment Program gave the Blue Box program an award for leadership to both industry, government, and the nonprofit sector, for leadership and support for the environment and for cooperation in action. That's how far the program went. So why do I tell you that story at some length? Well, it's because I believe that the shift that I made and the whole story holds some insights on how we can all make change in our world. Unity is about transforming the world, but it gets practically done in daily activities, doesn't it? Well, I think some of these insights can help us make that transformation in our relationships, in our work, in our social life, and in the world around us. You see, with Zeal, we have a choice. We have a choice to use it to push others, to try to change or control or tell them what to do. And that leads, in my experience, to more conflict and separateness. We can also choose to serve others with our zeal, serve others and God, the universe, the the greater good. And in doing that, it grows connection. It can grow healing, and it can grow love among, between, and around us. But how do we know what we're doing and which way it's leading us? Well, here's the way it's come to me. In your desire, anywhere in your life, to do what is right for you or for the world, ask yourself these questions. Do I tend to put others down or raise them up? Do I tend to shut down others' voices or invite them to speak and share what's in their heart and mind? Do I tend to close my ears or open my mind and my heart? And one final question you can ask yourself. Do I try to get others to do something I want, to live or speak or do or act in a certain way that I would like? Or do I encourage them to be true to themselves? Another way of looking at these questions is perhaps even to flip them. How would you like somebody else to treat you? And which would help you to open up most to the zeal and the spirit of love within? When our zeal is about getting our way or fighting against someone else's, it's really a zeal that's serving the ego. But when we use it to heal and try to find what's best for all, it's a zeal that's in service of spirit, or what I have sometimes called reconnecting our collective soul, the Christ mind, our universal self. That quote that Carolyn read in today's daily word from the Bible, 1 Peter, quite meaningful here. Whoever speaks must do so as one speaking the very words of God. Whoever serves must do so with the strength that God supplies. And the reason I end with this is that as we choose to become channels, not just for our own thoughts and our own feelings, but the higher self and greater good within us, there is so much more that we can accomplish because it's the wisdom of the universe moving through us that gives us the words and the strength to do the transformation. What I've come to recognize through this is that a zeal, the kind of zeal that Charles Fillmore was pointing for, a zeal for God or for good, is about finding our own spark or a divine purpose within. It's about finding answers that help not just ourselves or our friends, but everyone. It's about treating people with love and respect and literally helping them to experience the divine in their own lives. For me, that's the true gift we can give another person, and it's why zeal is one of Unity's 12 powers. So with that, I invite you to shake your hands a little bit, perhaps move your shoulders, your body, take a moment and begin to turn within. Settle back and take a breath. Just let all the words I've said just pass over you and just see what sticks and resonates as you breathe, and perhaps put your hands over your heart. And let's let Bethany guide us into meditation and prayer with this song, Go Within.
Settle back, close your God is here loving you. Hear the oceans roar. Go within, let the peace bring you home once more. Let your thoughts drift away. You don't need them here. You are in a quiet place where trust replaces fear. Feel the beating of your heart. Feel the air upon your skin. Listen to the silence. God is calling,
And begin to notice that gentle presence, that stirring inside. However it speaks to you, invite it in. Get to know it. And let's just sit in the silence for a few moments as you feel a tingling in your fingers and your toes, the beating of your heart, and the ocean's roar of silence within. And now, as you hear my voice again, I invite you to very gently and slowly come back to present awareness of the world around you. Perhaps your eyes flicker and begin to let in the light. Begin to see the computer screen again. Hear the sounds in the room. And take a breath. And just allow it to begin to move you, perhaps moving your fingers or your feet or your toes, your body. Begin to come back into the room, present awareness of the things around you. And as you begin to come back, I'm just going to read to you 2 prayers and see how they may resonate for you. The first I've called, Show Me Your Way. In my zeal, Holy One, I tend to get lost in my way. Show me your way. The way that heals and that brings all of my sisters and my brothers home with me and you. And the second prayer, help me to do. This one's adapted from a song called I Do This by a friend Nathan Aswell. Loving Spirit, help me to do what feeds my soul, what makes me whole, what helps me to heal, and what makes me sing inside. Loving Spirit, help me to do what allows me to remember you. Take another breath. Relax into your chair. Let all of the words go. And now let's invite in Vesna for the rest of our service. God bless.
This is my